destiny line. We introduced it for those who were here yesterday evening, but today we try to go into it. What is the destiny line? Can it help us? The goal would be, if you're interested in this approach, to find a technically simple but psychologically and spiritually profound technique for looking at astrology. So you wouldn't require any great maths, no midpoint analysis, no huge computer program crunching the chart to some kind of shape for you, but it's actually a simple technique by eye to look at charts but potentially gain deep access to them. Now, we looked at this message from Rudyard yesterday that really the transformationally orientated astrologer would have some kind of ability to read a cosmic message in the chart and then be able to translate that existentially to the individual whose chart they're looking at. So there's two tasks. We focused on a bit of both yesterday. Actually having something to say and saying it in an engaging and real way. Those are the two tasks of the astrologer in a way. Some astrologers like to prioritize the one. They like to think that having something to say is the all, and we examined that yesterday. That it's pretty useless to have a lot to say if what you say never gets through to the person in a meaningful fashion. We aim to do both. The ideal goal as an astrologer, even with your friends, even if you're not a professional astrologer, all you want to do is look at your friends' charts, that you come to a group like this and you go away at break time and just discuss each other's charts, even if that's the only goal. You still want to be able to do that in a quality way, because your friend might take you really seriously and your friend might change their life on the basis of what you say about their chart. So we're aiming that what you say about the chart is pretty deep, is pretty real. But he also points out here what is potential and unconscious at birth has already been actualized to some extent, partially, semi-consciously or unconsciously. So no one's going to have been not living their birth chart. It's not like they weren't living their birth chart, then they come and see you as an astrologer and all of a sudden you say something and they start living their birth chart. Everybody's already alive, stating the obvious. Everyone's already living their chart. So everyone's already in a process of the expression of their chart through time. So everyone will have already partially realized aspects of their chart, consciously or unconsciously. So as well as the natal chart imprint, you're also looking at the evolutionary arc of a person, like water suspended, like frozen water or something, the movement of themselves through time that's contained within the chart. So one very real exercise I teach in classes sometimes is to look at the chart as the congealed past, as almost like a mosaic of the past that's already occurred. Or, when I'm feeling a bit darker, as a crime scene. So that as students of astrology, we are forensic detectives, like the CSI team with our specializations, looking for what's occurred. To understand the past is far more important and constructive than to try to evoke an always uncertain, even if probable, future. What is the point of predictions if you haven't understood the past? The only meaningful predictions, I would say, that I'm interested in are those which understand the past acutely, recognized if the same set of causes and influences within the person continue, then the very likely future outcome is obvious. So if you are already drinking a bottle of bourbon at breakfast to face the day, you carry on doing that without exploring the deeper reasons for your anxiety, then the future looks a certain way. And you don't have to be a genius astrologer using highly articulate ancient techniques to work that out. To me, it's a fantasy that astrology overrides that. People will then, drinking that bottle of bourbon every day, will look to astrology to try and find this point that overrides that, whereas the point is themselves. So all of this approach is to go deeper into being, deeper into the self, that the key to understanding death is in the person, and that the chart is a symbol of that person. The birth chart is not separate from your real experience. If it is, then you're going into an abstraction. If your astrology becomes completely separate from your real being, then you have gone into an abstraction and you will cul-de-sac eventually, mentally. It will become an interesting intellectual hobby, but it won't transform people. That astrology is a tool to transform your life, to increase power, creativity, connectedness, love, intention. My critique of astrology is that often it just involves reading ancient techniques which give one this sense that the ego has, where even though you're drinking that bottle of bourbon every day, something will come along when the magical signature happens, when it all comes together in 20 Yaya, in 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar, in such and such, where the new technique comes along at such and such a time. Suddenly the bottle of bourbon will turn into a flower, and I will just love the world. No, it doesn't happen unless you see yourself drinking the bottle of bourbon and go, this isn't for me anymore. Or you turn your life over to a higher power. That remarkably radical democratic spiritual movement, the 12-step movement. This is a 12-step movement, folks. Astrology, a 12-step movement. Aries to Pisces, 12 steps. Courage, Aries to recognize your mess, all the way to Pisces, surrender to a higher power. Astrology as a 12-step movement. And that's from some kind of basis in ourselves as practitioners, we would offer that to people in a meaningful way. Anyone who comes to see you is already hurting. Some shit has gone down already. There's nothing you can do about that. No amount of good feeling can go back and make someone's life better how it was before. All you can do is find the new them now that can understand that in a different way. And one of the key advantages of this technique, to the extent that it focuses on the past, is that it gives an evolutionary context to why certain difficult things may have happened to people. Often, if you think about it, by definition, your comfort zone cannot be the source of your transformation. If you're in your comfort zone, you're just in an expression of your past. So by definition, to deeply grow, you have to go out of your comfort zone. And what's the single thing most likely to knock you out of your comfort zone? Trauma. Literally from the root in Indo-European of trau, which means thrown or knocked out of yourself. Trauma is the great thing that gives lie to that New Age phrase, you only get the experiences you can handle. Clearly, by definition, trauma is the insight that that doesn't always happen. So the key to a transformational astrology is to understand that your life is a transformative situation. It sounds like pop psychology, it sounds super simple, but it's actually incredibly radical. It means everything that occurs to you, seen from this point of view, is a reflection of everything that you have tried to bring into being from every single different part of you within your soul field, and its various stages of success or failure, and that's all up for grabs, moment by moment, every single moment, extending forever, in all directions, without end. It's actually a radical state of consciousness where you realize everything that comes up for you, all your doubts, insecurities and fears, or even your good moods, they're all kind of in the mix to become this whole person. So we're hoping, aren't we, really, instead of seeing everything that happens as just another sign that our life went wrong, you know, when we got divorced, or our life went wrong, we turned down that great job opportunity, or our life went wrong when we went to see this astrologer from England who was really annoying and bummed us out. You know, we're always looking for this hook to place the feeling of what went wrong. From this point of view, the feeling of what went wrong is something that arises from within, because of everything we're carrying within the soul field as memory within us wherever we go. And we have to see that distinction at all times, because otherwise you start looking outside. And in Plato's idea, what you're trying to do then is touch the shadows on the cave wall and interact with them as if they're real, rather than recognize the source of them. The psychodynamic picture of depth psychology is that crucial aspects of your personality were formed prior to the age of 6. So just by the time you grow up and become conscious enough of yourself to maybe understand what happened, it's already happened to you. Jupiter square the nodes. Again, back to this issue of honesty or belief. One example I have of that, I'm not going to do the whole chart, but this is an example of a young man who, again, this was another person who witnessed abuse within the family. And when they shared the fact, after overhearing a phone call that their sister was being abused by their stepdad, the family shut the boy out, closed down around, closed ranks. They shot the messenger. Jupiter square the nodes. South node Gemini 9th, North node Sagittarius 3rd. By the way, just as a brief aside, sometimes we're born into life, aren't we, for the importance of telling the truth in difficult circumstances. That's not going to be an easy ride, is it? It wasn't an easy ride to live in like 30s Germany, was it? Mm-hmm. What did you do if you were clever? Maybe you emigrated to the United States. But if you stayed, what did you do? Yeah, die. Or a client was talking recently how their family, the grandfather was training the kids. So you stand in line in the Nazi youth, but you mouth the words, you don't really say them. This kid's dad was an undercover cop, his original biological dad, who fell in love with his undercover wife and left his original family to be with his undercover life. Issues of truth, and honesty and perspective saturated this young man's life. Jupiter square the nodes. Jupiter square the nodes can also be about certain ideological struggles. What's right, what's true. Issues of honesty. I think Joan of Arc had Jupiter square the nodes. Even what you believe. Is it a vision or is it a distortion? Issues to do with an intuitive perspective that will allow you to integrate your life path. Saturn square the nodes. Unresolved grief. Unresolved grief. Struggle with the consensus, perhaps. You know, I have Saturn square the nodes, and in my childhood, there was no exposure to wisdom teachings of any kind. No one even used the concept of maturity. No one even had a concept of maturation. No one even literally knew what it meant. So the idea of individuation or enlightenment or progression, that was just in a different universe. Saturn square the nodes, an experience of having to encounter the most rigid mentality or the most consensus mindset in order to understand it. Either because there's been naivete in the past or because you yourself have been overly influenced and perhaps reduce the significance of your own voice. In my case, Mercury Aquarius conjunct the North Node in Aquarius, Saturn square the nodes. So you have a person potentially whose radicalism has been suspended in the past because of judgments against it. When I gave the Mercury conjunct the North Node, Saturn square the nodes. There may be an issue with the particular father, soul that's manifested as the father in the current life.
Could it be considered authorities?
Yeah, it's taking responsibility for things. Maybe an unresolved crisis of maturation. Uranus square the nodes. Unresolved complex trauma, interrupting the destiny line. An unresolved individuation issue. You frequently see with Uranus square the nodes people who struggle to articulate their individuation. They have wanted to be individuated, or what often happens is the part of them that tried to individuate and become uniquely themselves was traumatized.
and they suppress it linked to trauma memories. Neptune square the nodes often corresponds to, in my experience, and I found this with Jupiter to a lesser extent. Jupiter often corresponds to loss of faith, loss of vision of meaning. And Neptune square the nodes often refers to a disillusioning experience. In very extreme cases with trauma signatures, Neptune square the nodes can correspond to literally states of inner futility that are so significant the person kind of gives up or has given up in the past. That you're encountering a kind of lost part of the psyche that feels like they've given up.
What do you do about that?
Well, that is a good question.
Send them to a counselor.
If you no, but even conventional therapy won't always work with that because it's a spiritual dilemma, really. What you have to do is create a space that's radical enough that the futility can be acknowledged, but held in a space where there's no such thing as that futility. You have to recognize the universal aspect of the loving substrate of reality that, you know, Bambi's mother are lying alone in a forest with a bullet wound, bleeding out painfully in the forest on their own, little deer, shot by hunter, left to die, is held by something in this world. Can you recognize the part that amongst the trauma, you're going to die, amongst these difficult things, you're going to lose the people you love? Can you recognize the radical nature of the freedom and the love on the level of the ground of your being in amongst that experience? If you can get to that space and you can hold disillusionment traumas, they're very difficult otherwise. What you do, offer progressive release of it and progressive encouragement of other visions. But that's the tidbit mentality, the little bit of tempting someone into a new vision is very, very tough if they have a core disillusionment trauma. I've found that almost the best way is to go into it directly. Almost challenge the futility at a certain point, but that can only come about at the right time in the process. These are very, very subtle and difficult things. But the core thing to recognize in Jupiter and Neptune squares to the nodes at least is a radical revisioning of the nature of reality as a core therapeutic component. People will not change therapeutically unless they change their deepest beliefs at certain points. Pluto square the nodes often indicates the most fundamental challenge to the nodal destiny line, like a fundamental kind of ego-soul dilemma. As the person has been struggling with the destiny line, it often indicates unresolved power dynamics, where the person wants to continue the way that they've felt strong, but they're feeling this powerful pull. So for me, it's the ultimate kind of struggle across what Rudyard called the human will and the divine will elements, ego and soul. That lady, Pluto and Libra in the second, Saturn that ruled the North Node in the 5th, Capricorn in the 5th, on the South Node in Cancer in the 11th. Her ego did not want to have a child. She was using every possible form of contraception not to. The struggle becomes to live with that which wanted to emerge. You could also take the same chart after you've done that and contemplated it for a goodly while, I would suggest, and take a new copy of it and simply draw in red all the stressful aspects from Uranus and planets in Aquarius or the 11th house to planets in the chart, and contemplate the threads of nonlinear memory.
What do you mean by non-linear?
I mean memory that's not located in the linear processing of the mind. It's not a conscious memory, it's held in the subtle energy field. It's memory that's held by the whole person. So it's non-local. It doesn't just emerge from your thinking. It's not like, I'm struggling to remember. It's memory as it directly, energetically shapes you. It can be baggage, but it can also be that which illuminates you. That's the paradox of that kind of memory. The electricity in the energy field that corresponds to the Uranian insight is both illuminative, but it also carries trauma reflections. Or places where the identity is disassociated. Sometimes I think it's as simple as this, and I'll just say it radically. Sometimes I think huge chunks of the world are just suffering from complex past life PTSD. That we're just carrying the traumas of history in this unresolved way around with us. You know, like the spears are sticking out of the back, and each time we turn around to say hi to someone at a party, and the spear sticking out of our back knocks someone else over at the same time energetically, and we're reeling from something else, and the memories of the Holocaust, and oh my God, the indigenous peoples. It's like we're just.
Or slavery. And everybody.
So every time we liberate individually and we liberate collectively. The purpose of these teachings is not to become overburdened by trauma or stresses across the destiny line. It is to see these patterns solely for the purpose of liberation, for the freedom of every individual on this planet, for all sentient life. That's why I get so clinical about the nature of what's going on, because what I have found, the single greatest healing principle I have found is you cannot surrender things and transform them if you don't know what they are. Because they're simply blind spotting you all the time. You have to be able to identify what the dynamics are in order to heal and transform. And that's why I spend so much time on these kind of clinical focuses and on the destiny line to see what it might hold, and these focuses on trauma, only for the purpose of release. Because my intention in sharing this teaching today, and as always really, is that some of us walk away from this, including myself, we've learned something from it. Again, as I always do when I contemplate this material, I again learn something. And that we utilize that on behalf of our fellow man and woman in this world for the betterment of humanity.